Okay, now you can start.
After we left the neighborhood at 1442 North New Jersey Street, we moved to a place called Irvington on the east side of Indianapolis. It was not annexed, but it was not called suburb. But it was the idea of two Quakers to create a neighborhood that was progressive.
Could you repeat that because of the car noise? I'm sorry. It was...
After we left 14...
You don't have to repeat the whole thing, just the last sentence you said.
Oh.
About the Quakers.
Okay. Irvington, which took its name after Washington Irving, was created by two Quaker gentlemen who wanted to create a progressive area and maybe even set up a women's, what did they want to call it? What did I call it before? A women's academy, so that women could go to school. And they were progressive. There were several churches in the area, and I had cousins who lived there in the neighborhood, and they went to the Methodist church, and so we lived not too far from them, and then we both attended the Methodist church. And my mother and aunt were both very active in the Sunday school there.
This was... Which Methodist church was this?
It was called the Irvington Methodist Church. In fact, everything was called Irvington in there at that time.
Oh.
And there was a matinee there which was called The Irving. And it became a central meeting place on Saturdays for us to go see movies. And it was a short distance, so we could walk to the movie. It was no problem. And many children went there. And at that time, when we went to the movies, there were newsreels about what was going on in the war during World War II.
And that's how you got your news about the war. Or did you read the newspapers?
Well, we had newspapers too. They were important.
And you listened to the radio?
I will positively listen to the radio. In fact, I remember listening to some of what Franklin Roosevelt said when he became president.
So you remember this fireside chats, or was that a little too early for that?
Well, it was a little too early, but ultimately I remember there being on. I didn't always listen to all of it, but I was very much aware that Roosevelt was the president and was talking to the people. So Irvington, I went to school number 57, which was a good school too, and the teachers were very well trained and interested in the activities in Irvington and in our families. And when I went to 57, I entered the 4th grade.
Right.
And I remember vividly, starting to learn about James Whitcomb Riley, who happened to live just beyond Irvington on Washington Street out in Greenfield.
So what poems do you remember by Riley that they did?
Well, of course I remember the one that is about the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. But they were easy to learn, and they were simple stories about growing up on a farm. And so we were encouraged to learn some of the lines and read them aloud. So I got to take what I learned at school number 27 about being in Christmas plays and transfer it to Irvington because, of course, they also like to have us performing sometimes in different ways.
So you had plays.
Well, later, not right away so much plays, but later we did have some in English classes.
English classes.
And we met once a week in the auditorium there, and sang together. We might sing patriotic songs because of World War II.
Right.
And some of the children actually took ballet classes, and if we had a program, they might do a ballet number. So we were a strong community school. And as I got older, I helped in the cloakrooms of the younger kids who had to be helped on with their boots or their leggings or the whatever. Because we all, well, not all of us, but many of us walked to school, whether it was snowing or what it was doing. And so I sometimes got to help look after the little ones, which of course was a good way to get me interested in becoming a teacher later on too.
Right.
And so, now let's see, Irvington. We took English. We took usually a science class, but not with laboratories because there was no lab situation in those days. And of course we had mathematics, some of those basic courses of that period in our lives. And Irvington was important because I got to visit my friends at their houses more. I didn't get to do that when we were younger. But after school, I might drop by a friend's house and we would listen to music, or we would chatter, or we might color, various simple things. We became much more social.
So they had record players.
Yes, but they were rather they were nothing fancy. They were not fancy phonographs at that time.
Well, it was all 78s then.
Is that right?
Oh,
it was
yes,
78s.
yeah.
And of course you had to change the records. They were not automatic in those days. And I was trying to think of some particular song, but I'm not thinking of it. One of my friends who happened to live on the way from school liked Al Jolson. I was never sure quite why, but somehow she took to Al Jolson, and so she'd like to imitate what Al Jolson might sing. Mammy, my little mammy.
Well, which friend was this?
Her name was Janice Lair.
Oh.
But not many of the children wanted to take Al Jolson as a role model, I have to admit. They were more apt to take Judy Garland and as a role model. And of course The Wizard of Oz was very important at that time. And often the movies were Disney movies that we saw. Snow White and what came after Snow White. I remember seeing Bambi at that movie theater.
What about Dumbo?
Oh, yes. How did I forget Dumbo? Dumbo was one of the early ones, and it was, of course, a favorite of all the kids.
Do you remember seeing Mickey Mouse or Bugs Bunny?
Oh, I don't remember Bugs Bunny as much. I definitely remember Mickey Mouse as a character. And Minnie Mouse.
There were a lot of Mickey Mouse toys.
I guess there were, but you know what? I wasn't wild about the toys because I liked books.
Right.
And, oh yes, of course I have to tell the story about the car. my father was able to move to Irvington because
I believe you told us this before, but this was in Irvington
yes.
when he bought the car, little
Yes,
kitty car.
yeah. Oh no, that was earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, that
so
was
you
earlier.
did tell us about.
Yeah,
Tell us.
okay, I did mention that, but so he was at the gasoline station that he was managing on New York Street, which was part of Indianapolis,
Right.
and he got back out to Irvington after work, and
You may need to speak a little louder because of the lawnmower.
pardon?
The lawnmower. You may have to speak a little louder.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Oh dear, that's too bad. Speaking of a lawnmower, in Irvington, we had a large yard in the house that we lived in.
Right.
And we were always mowing the lawn or my mother was out planting and taking care of her flowers, and we had an apple tree, and she would pick the apples. They were sort of not the kind that you eat, but sort of greenish apples that you might use in a pie.
Oh.
And so she would make apple pie, or she would steam and package up the apples for people to use for their pies, and then give them to her sisters, or the neighbors. My mother was always doing things in the house. My father at that time did not approve of women working outside the home. He grew up in a large family, and mothers did not work outside the home. But they did begin to do things that they could communicate with other women in the community and share ideas. And so she did that, and she did canning. And often I would take little bouquets of flowers to my teachers at school number 57 when they were out. Oh, next to the school, right next to the school, was a local library.
Right.
And I spent a lot of time in there after school looking for the books that I liked. And I believe that's when I started reading Nancy Drew mysteries. And then I read the older books that Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote as her family grew older.
Right.
So I was a constant reader. I was not necessarily very artistic or inclined musically, but I certainly enjoyed the classes that were there in the junior high, which were taught by very good teachers. And we had a math teacher who was my homeroom teacher, and she liked to read to us during homeroom from, there was a certain magazine that was popular then. Horizons weren't around then yet, were they?
No, was this a magazine that published fiction?
It could, or it could be poetry.
Well, it could have been a number of different magazines, possibly the Saturday Evening Post or Collier's, I don't know.
I don't remember the name of it. Anyway, as I went into junior high, I really enjoyed the English class.
Right.
Because I had an excellent teacher. And then later she would have the Shakespeare Drama Club.
Right.
And I would go to that special meeting once a week, and we would read lines from Shakespeare. And so she gave me a very good background in Shakespeare and made me a lover of that. She was also a science teacher, and I remember her teaching us about health. And we would have to make charts about the kinds of food that were important for us to eat and what vitamins.
What grade was this?
This was junior high.
Oh, okay.
Second. And
But you were still going to the same school?
Yes, it was in the same building.
Okay.
The junior high.
I
was
think
there.
that's it for today. Is that all right?